something else seems to be here to stay, and this is the tiff back and forth, on and off between the judiciary and the executive, notably the Chief Justice and the President himself. So we want to listen to a soundbite from the statement that came, is it 3 days now or something longer, where he's saying basically he can't find the President to discuss some of these things, such as the appointment of those judges.
You also know that I have, for a long time now, unsuccessfully sought an appointment to discuss this issue with you, leaving me with no option but to raise the matter through this public statement.
Linus, I'll start with you. This is, in many respects, unusual. I mean, if you think about how countries function, the CJ in broad daylight telling us there that he cannot find the President of the Republic, essentially saying either, because we'd assume he knows where the President is, he knows where State House is, so we can only assume that either he does not have access to State House, he probably does not have the President's number or any number of the President's handlers, or he has those numbers he calls and no one picks. All those scenarios don't sound good.
You know, I look at it in a bit of a warped way, Joe, if you may. And how I see it is, this is a moment of accountability by the Chief Justice, accountability to the public. Because we last saw him on exactly the same steps, saying exactly similar things. And Kenyans would have wondered, okay, did you fix your problems with the President and the executive? And the answer clearly is no. And what we are seeing now is a very ugly game of power that is coming out to play. A contest between politics and the law. And on this, you know, the verdict ought to be very, very clear, because the courts have repeatedly spoken for the law in terms of what the President ought to do with regard to the appointment of the 41 judges. And what the Chief Justice is saying is, one of them, between himself and the President, one of them is not following the law. And you could pick out the ruling of 3 judges delivered on the 6th of February, 2020, which basically declared that the President is constitutionally bound to announce the names, to name those judges as recommended by the Judicial Service Commission, because the JSC is the only body that is mandated to appoint judges. The role of the President is merely ceremonial. And so the court declared that the failure by the President to appoint the recommended judges violates the Constitution and also violates the Judicial Service Act. There's one last thing that I may want to add here, and that is the framing of this Constitution. The framers of the Constitution were very, very alert and aware of where the country is coming from, especially with regard to handling of these offices, such as those offices of the judges. The Constitution of Kenya 2010 really emphasizes on independence. And you look through those rulings, not just this one, but also the first one, petition number 313 of 2014, because this is the second time this government is being taken to court for not observing the Constitution. And the judges talk about what the drafters of the Constitution meant, which is separation of roles. Basically saying, Mr. President, the role of actually interviewing and appointing judges is and belongs to another body. Yours is to merely do the ceremonial bit and announce those names.
But the President, presumably the President, through the Attorney General, had a response, especially on those judges, saying why the President is not going to appoint them. I think we can listen to the Attorney General, Paul Kihara Kariuki, to just hear what he said. Then I'll come to you, Gashuri.
His Excellency the President will not abdicate his role as head of state and government to appoint persons with a questionable record to serve the nation in the solemn role of judge.
Okay. Let me go to Jamila first. Jamila.
Yes, Joe.
Okay.
Wow.
What is this gentleman saying? That the president is not going to appoint these people? I mean, Linus mentioned, and correctly so, I think, that the president's role here is simply to pick the recommendations from the JSC and basically formally declare that these people are now judges, isn't it?
You know, Joe, this is not the first time that the CJ has spoken about this. His frustrations are known. I keep remembering the other press conference he had last year, I think it was in November, alone on the steps of the court, like he did a few days ago. And he was talking about the frustrations and the challenges he was facing in the judiciary. And then earlier this year, when they were releasing the state of the judiciary report, again, he spoke about the issues they had, including the budget and how they're unable to continue with the work as they should because of lack of funds. And then now, again, this time again, him speaking and talking about how he had been unable to even speak to the president about this same issue of the 41 judges. Now, and then the next day, the Attorney General speaks, and we've heard what he said. And Linus has mentioned how the president is just supports kupitisha. These names have, the 41 had gone through the JSC, and the list had been given to the president just to approve. And of course, he said there are issues with some of the judges. But until today, I don't think anyone has come out to say, these are the particular judges we have issues with, and this is why we're not going to swear these particular ones in. And we can't swear these other ones. Maybe 20 have issues, 21 do not. We can swear them in. In fact, what is interesting is that the 10 out of the 11 judges are in the High Court, and they're supposed to be promoted to the Court of Appeal. But then if there are issues with them, they're still serving in the High Court. So is the threshold for integrity in the High Court lower than the Court of Appeal? So there are a lot of these other issues that are coming up in terms of why we don't have these judges already sworn in with the backlog of cases. It was interesting when he said when anyone wants a case, I think in the labor relations or the employment, I'm not sure if that's
Land and Environment Court.
The earliest date they'll get will be in 2022. Kama una kesi yote ardhi ama ya shamba. That's frustrating for someone who's been waiting for justice for all those years. Unaambiwa huwezi sikika, hakuna tarehe until 2022, all because the number of judges to listen to this case ni wachache.
Gashuri, I'm probably going to say I was intimidated, but look, what exactly is going on here with this? I mean, this has been going on forever. The judges duly vetted by the JSC, the commission that is constitutionally mandated to do this, but somehow at the stage where the president is supposed to put pen to paper and say this is it, there's a problem. It's quite unprecedented, and I think a lot of people are unhappy, including LSK.
Absolutely, and the relationship doesn't look neat. And the fact that the Chief Justice saying he cannot access the president speaks volumes on their relationship as the two heads of two arms of government, out of the three arms of government. And if the president meets speakers of the two chambers of parliament every so often, then you would wonder why the same access is not granted to the Chief Justice, which is not a healthy thing. Number one. Number two, Chief Justice David Maraga is on the tail end of his term. He assumed office on 19th of October 2016. He's 69 years old. The Constitution says the Chief Justice should retire at the age of 70. He turns 70 in January next year. So we're talking about months to his retirement. And looking at his tenure has been a tenure of a lot of frustrations, a lot of talk about frustrations. You remember the issue of budget cuts. You remember the issue of alleged mishandling and mistreatment when he attends national functions. So it's been lamentation after lamentation. But that aside, what I think is very important is the effect of the delay in appointment of new judges.
Yeah.
Because if there are delays, 13,000, 12,000, 7,000 cases, the Court of Appeal, it's not Maraga who suffers. It's the litigants who suffer. There are people in court today who have been chasing justice for the last couple of years, and they will continue to do so until there's a resolution on this tiff between the Chief Justice and the president. Then you can also talk about the succession contest for who becomes the next Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya. We're heading closer and closer to another election, and the Chief Justice's position is very pertinent insofar as resolution of disputes relating to a presidential election are concerned. There has also been talk about reorganization of the Judicial Service Commission, and this is the commission that will give us the next Chief Justice and the Supreme Court judges to constitute the bench of 7 at the Supreme Court. So these are pertinent issues, and we must look at them, in a broader way. But ultimately, there is need to resolve this quickly and urgently, because litigants are suffering. You can imagine there is somebody who has been chasing justice in the labor court or in the lands court or in the court of appeal and cannot be able to get it because of this tiff. And then also, if there are judges who have integrity questions, there should be no judge appointed with integrity questions. But at what point do these integrity questions arise? At what point should they be drawn to the attention of the Judicial Service Commission? And were these allegations of questionable integrity on some of the judges raised during the vetting process? If they were they taken care of? And is it possible to remedy the situation now that we are at the stage where we are and the president on his desk has a list of 41 nominees for appointment as judges?
And I think the other thing is that it is not clear what he's planning to do about it, because again, it's just been there, like
exactly.
It is suspended
since July last year.
Suspended animation.
Close to a year.
But there's something here that I think we need to talk about. The CJ talked about defiance of court orders, and I think we have that soundbite from that press conference. We can play that and then we proceed.
The president's disregard of court orders does not bode well for our constitutional democracy, and is potentially a recipe for anarchy. The government cannot demand of its citizens the obedience of the law. It is itself disobeying with abandon.
So in a moment, we'll also play the response from the
Attorney General,
who I must say, Yvonne, had a rather general response to all of these things, saying the executive will not be invited in this public contest, whatever he said. But very interesting situation here where there are specific things that the CJ said, but he basically didn't respond to it. But let's talk about the court
without responding. And the issue of court disobedience, I mean, the executive falls afoul. And maybe Linus can tell me about that saying that says, he who comes before the court must have clean hands.
Clean hands.
Clean
and
hands.
So, it is important that you come in and say, look, I have done everything the Constitution requires of me, and therefore this is what I am seeking. Which reminds me of what we've always talked about, back in the day, what the previous administration would do, and that was of President Moi. He would make it legal, and then he would proceed to do what he wants to do, as opposed to going against the law. What you were talking about, by the way, about court orders. Look, last year I listed all of these, and I think, we will get back to that in a moment. Court orders that have been disobeyed, including those 2 that you have talked about on this very issue of the appointment of the 41 judges, some even by the president himself, not just by the executive, which he leads. But listen, there's a strategy that the CJ is using here. He turns 70 next year, but he has 4 months to go, because apparently at that point he will go on terminal leave while all of this is being decided. His very public, display of this is set to build a narrative that I have been doing this, I'm on the right side of the law, this is what it is. He is prosecuting his case, which is typically what the AG tried to say in the court of public opinion, to show you, look, he has nothing to lose. He's got 4 months to go, even though I've seen there's a petition before that's been presented to the JSC for his removal. But for him, it's to go to the public and say,
this is what I have done. I have tried to reach the president. I cannot. This is what the issue is. And like you were talking about the issue of the AG's response. Maybe we can listen to that before we take a break,
yes,
where he was talking about on-court disobedience, you know, basically responding to the Chief Justice's remarks on the same.
The executive also declines to comment on the relative merits or demerits of the ongoing cases referred to by the Honourable the Chief Justice in his press release.
Oh, so he responded without responding again.
His response was no response.
His response was no response. And that, for me, is what is interesting in this entire battle. I mean, like we were saying, at all points, someone is not being truthful or being economical with the truth here. So if the president says he received a memorandum from the NIS on some of these 41 individuals, but remember, they also go through an extensive background check by the JSC during the whole process of vetting. The president has at least 3 representatives on the JSC. One is the Attorney General, and then there's one man and one woman who represent the public, who are appointed by the president, of course, with Parliament's approval. So, you know, for whatever the Constitution says, the president does have some sort of control. He has 3 people through whom he can speak at the JSC. So the question is, you know, what happened in the JSC during the deliberations? What was said about these individuals? Did the NIS give certain information to the JSC and give different information to the president about these 41? Even to date, we don't know who out of these 41. Is it all of them? Is it some of them? Is it some of those who are in the High Court, or is it those others? Like, you know, what is going on here?
Or what the problem is.
Or what the problem is. It's been a year. It'll be a year in July. I wonder,
though, whether the Attorney General knows, because he is in the JSC, but also he speaks for the president.
Absolutely, yeah.
The judiciary. They want to make the judiciary a puppet.
Very strong words, Sinas.
Very strong words, Joe, and I think history will judge David Maraga quite kindly, and it must be stated at this point. Look, and Francis pointed it out very correctly, that this is a man who is doing probably his last months in office. Typically, somebody would not want to pick this kind of fight on their way out.
Yeah.
But he is looking forward, he's looking ahead, and looking very, very seriously at what this means to the country, what it means to the judiciary, what it means to the principles of governance in this country if things are let to run the way they are. And how things are running right now, and as demonstrated by the statement, by both the statement and even attitude of the Attorney General, the executive is going rogue. They're not going to respect court orders. They're not going to respect other arms of government, and they want to be heard by the same arms of government. And when you look at the respondent's case in this particular petition 369 of 2019, let's remember that the petitioner was lawyer Adrian Kamotho Njenga, who went to court and said that the president is in violation of the Constitution by not naming the 41 judges. When you look at the respondent's case, it is a very lazy argument based on an affidavit by the head of public service, Joseph Kinyua. It lacks conviction. You can tell it is a game. First, it starts by challenging the jurisdiction of the court to hear that matter. When an argument starts with challenging the jurisdiction of the court, that is always a weak case. Number 2, the petitioner also purported to suggest to the court that the threshold in terms of numbers in the Court of Appeal has been met. Why is the executive purporting to be the one in charge of staffing the Court of Appeal? How do you know the numbers are adequate? It's not your role. The Constitution, Article 166, doesn't give you those powers. Then it goes to suggesting that the president was yet to be furnished with a report of the envisaged judicial needs and assessments by the first interested party, that's the Judicial Service Commission, that formed the basis of the recommendation for the appointments. Very, very weak arguments that really didn't deserve the attention of a higher court. A lower court would have easily dispensed this matter because it's a very clear violation of the Constitution. Final point here, Joe. You just need to look at the respondent's case. Very weak, arrogant, and basically going rogue. Are we looking at factors that are just beyond the numbers of judges? What is it that is at play? And Francis, you had mentioned election petitions. Are we going to have a country where the constitution of the judiciary will be looked at entirely based on election petitions? Justice is not just about election petitions. There is something else that the Court of Appeal does that's beyond the elections. We do know that the current administration is not happy with two court rulings. One, of course, is the presidential petition that nullified the election in 2017. And now there was a Court of Appeal decision, actually a High Court decision, just before the second election that basically declared that the returning officers were appointed
correctly,
inappropriately. And so what that would have meant is there'll be no elections. Guess who quashed that decision?
The current Attorney General.
Kariuki, who now becomes the Attorney General of Kenya.
And you'd also remember, Linus, how that appeal was dealt with.
At night.
Shortly after the High Court had made a decision, that very evening almost.
The process would normally be the Chief Justice would appoint a judge in the Court of Appeal to listen to that matter. That process was not followed in nullifying the decision by Justice Odunga. So is it time these things came out that probably the president, the administration, that are uncomfortable about the names, particular judges, that they could be too independent for their liking?
And Justice Mumbi Ngugi is one of those who's fairly independent, who has made some, rulings that have been a landmark.
Seminal rulings that are quoted everywhere.
Odunga too,
Odunga as well, yes. Yeah. And if you remember with Odunga, remember there was that very public attack against him by members of the National Assembly. You remember in the run-up to 2017. Aden Duale was the majority leader standing on the steps out there saying, Justice Odunga, we will revisit. Since when also did the National Assembly start to say that we will decide what happens within the judiciary? So you could see, it's like you said, there's been a historical, this is a revisit, and it's been happening ever so
And the CJ has spoken about it a couple of times. In November last year, for instance, he was threatening to boycott those national days or pick and choose which ones he would attend if he wasn't, in his words, respected.
That unless I'm treated with the dignity due to my office, I will choose which of those state functions I will attend. It is wastage.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to say one thing. He is going out on a blaze of glory. This is what he is doing. He is making his public statement, and he's hoping that, when the history books are written, that he will be on the right side, and he stood up to the executive and stood up to the excesses of the executive. So it seems to me like that's what this is, which is why you notice he cuts a very lone figure. He doesn't stand with other members of the Supreme Court. He doesn't stand with other members of the JSC. He is by himself. He is on this mission to say, this is what it is. I mean, he really is thinking with the end in mind.
And I think what was...
He's also thinking of his personal integrity.
Legacy, yes.
Personal integrity.
Right.
Let's remember that when he appeared for the interviews for Chief Justice...
Vetting.
For the vetting, he famously lifted the Bible to say that he has never taken a bribe. When he was reading the preamble to the nullification of the presidential election results, he spoke of God and he spoke of
fidelity to
the Constitution.
The fear of God.
Yes, and the fear of God. Yes.
Here is a man who wants to attach conscience to the law, which is a very, very interesting thing, because they ought not to be separate. And by the way, it's that gap between conscience and the law that has been our problem. Because you have people clearly who are doing things that in the privacy of their bathrooms they would not agree with. I would want to say, for example, when it comes to the case of the Attorney General Kihara Kariuki, who is an ACK, he used to be an ACK, I remember when I covered the swearing in of David Gitari, he's the one who performed.
Oh, okay.
The Chancellor or something.
Yes, yes.
All right.
Now, the gap between his conscience and what he's doing as Attorney General, that has to come to question, especially with regard to handling this matter. Remember, he sits in the JSC, meaning he should have known the questions and matters being raised in this petition in the respondent's case about some report by the NIS, which they refused to share with JSC. How can JSC proceed on information that has not been availed? How is the AG living with that conscience of sitting there and then coming out and playing a different game on this end? It is, in terms of the head-to-head, Maraga has done better than the Attorney General, especially on the question of integrity here. If we are talking of Article 10, Maraga is doing it right.
I'll look at it this way, Joe, briefly. If it's a question of integrity, it would then be important that the executive, the president, and the Attorney General tells us these are the specific judges with integrity questions, so that you can save the rest who have no integrity issues.
And these are the questions.
Yeah, to proceed. Because as it is now, you have a list of 41 nominees. So everybody is now speculating, because the list was published. The lists were published on who was being nominated for appointment as what, as judge of which division. So all those 41 are suspects as it is now, because we don't know whose integrity is in question.
Yes.
If it was to move this discussion forward, is present the list and say, out of these 41, 5 or 10 have integrity questions, and they are the following: 1, 2, 3, and these are the issues about them. So then now we can move the discussion to what are the concerns now, so that everybody plays in an open field. As it were now, we don't have judges as we should have in those various divisions. Cases are lagging behind, the backlog is heavy, and we have 41 judges whose integrity is being speculated, or 41 nominees whose integrity is being speculated.
And that's 41 judges.
Briefly, so that we go to Kirinyaga.
The issue of the judges is actually instances, or another instance of the executive ignoring court orders. Remember, there were 2 in relation to this particular issue of 41 judges, and there are many instances, and I'll mention it in my memo. But this degree of contempt of court, ignoring court orders, has a ripple effect, not just to people. For instance, when the CJ was talking about how almost 1 billion shillings in damages that are supposed to be paid to people who had taken the government to court, and the courts ruled that they be given that money, have still not been paid. That's a very big issue in terms of the government ignoring court orders. And very recently, Kariobangi, we saw over 1,000 people whose homes were demolished, despite there being a court order stopping that. Miguna, who can forget? He was thrown out of this country.
9, I think.
Yeah.
Are there 9 court orders?
9 court orders. So those are just few that we are mentioning now, in terms of how the judiciary, in my opinion, has been belittled. What the judges decide in court don't matter. Forgetting that it's just not the normal Kenyan who goes to court to look for justice. Even the government itself goes to court looking for justice. And when court decisions that are made and are ignored by the same executive, it's really a worrying trend.
Yeah.
All right.
I know you want to move it forward. Can I move it forward with this tweet from Jeremiah Kariuki? He says, it looks like it's easier for the president to do WhatsApp with Francis Gashuri and not pick Maraga's calls. Talk of real revisiting. So, hii maneno unaweza sort. Rahisi sana. Ongea. Just give him a call and say, yo, what's up?
Zero.
What's up, Mr. President?
Zero.
Just Chief Justice anakutafuta, si... Muvutiane waya anyway.
Simuniwacha, please. In fact, there's a tweet here by Maureen Siko. She says, I'll say this, and for all, the executive is suffocating the judiciary.
Okay. Haya.